Have you ever noticed that as you begin to grow, some people around you start to grow distant? Not because you did something wrong, not because you changed for the worse, but because you evolved and your growth exposed their comfort zone. See, people often say they want you to succeed, until your success challenges their stagnation. Suddenly, the people who once cheered for you go silent. No texts, no calls, no support. And in that silence, you start to wonder, did I do something wrong? But here's the truth. Their silence is not your failure. It's their discomfort. Your growth became a mirror they weren't ready to look into. And this is where Stoic wisdom offers us something powerful. Silence is not always rejection. Sometimes, it's reflection. The ancient Stoics believed that the reactions of others reveal more about them than about you. When you choose discipline over distraction, peace over drama, growth over gossip, don't be surprised when people pull away. You didn't lose them. They lost access to the version of you that tolerated less than what you now know you deserve. It's in these moments of silence, when people disappear, when the phone doesn't ring, when the room grows quiet, that we learn one of life's most underrated lessons. Silence speaks. And often, it speaks the truth more clearly than words ever could. So if you're in that season right now, where the people around you are fading, where you're met with distance instead of support, don't chase, don't beg, don't shrink, stand still, stay strong. And listen, because that silence, it might just be the sound of your boundaries working, the sound of your evolution unfolding, and the universe making room for people who can meet you where you are, not where you used to be. Welcome to a new chapter. Not everyone will come with you, but those who do, they're the ones who won't flinch in the face of your light. Part 1. Their silence is a mirror. Let me ask you something. Have you ever had someone suddenly disappear from your life, right after you started doing better? Not because you hurt them, not because you changed for the worse, but because you started evolving, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And suddenly, they went silent. No message, no explanation, just distance. Now here's the hard truth. Sometimes people ghost you not because of who you are, but because of who they're not ready to become. Your growth becomes a spotlight, and it shines, not just on where you're going, but on where they're still stuck. Think about it. When you begin choosing discipline over distraction, peace over drama, healing over hiding, some people don't know how to stay close. Not because they hate you, but because your transformation reminds them of everything they've been avoiding in themselves. And that's silence. That ghosting, that pulling away, it's not rejection. It's a reflection, a mirror. The Stoics taught us that we can't control how others respond to our path. We can only walk it with integrity. And when you start walking in truth, in clarity, in purpose, that walk may echo into the hearts of others as discomfort. You didn't shame them, but your presence made it harder for them to lie to themselves. You didn't hurt them, but your energy held up a mirror, and in it they saw the gap between who they are and who they could be, and that's not something everyone is ready to face. It's like standing in front of a clean window after years of fog. You see too clearly. It's uncomfortable. It demands change, so what do? They shut the blinds. They vanish, they go silent, but listen closely. Their silence does not define your worth. It only confirms your impact. Sometimes people don't flee from you. They flee from the version of themselves that awakens in your presence. And that's not yours to carry. That's not your burden to solve. Your job is to keep growing, keep healing, keep rising, without apology. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. Their silence is not your punishment. It's a signal that you're becoming someone who no longer fits inside the boxes they're still hiding in. And while that might feel lonely at times, remember, the path of growth is never crowded, but it is sacred. So if people fall away, let them. You're not being abandoned. You're being aligned with your truth, your values, and with the people who will meet you there, without fear, without shame, and without disappearing. Part 2. Emotional utility and disposability. Let's talk about something that hits harder than we like to admit. Being used, not for money, not for favors, but for your emotional energy. See, some people didn't truly connect with your soul. They connected with your support. They didn't love you for who you are. They loved what you did for them emotionally. You listened. You held space. You became their therapist, their late-night lifeline, their safe place when the world got loud. And for a while, that connection felt deep, real, mutual. But then something changed. The moment you pulled back, the moment you stopped being the one who always made them feel better, they disappeared. No warning, no conversation. Just distance. Why? Because for them, your value wasn't in your presence, it was in your emotional utility. You were like a charger to their drained battery. And once they were recharged, once their crisis passed, their confidence came back. Or they met someone else who could offer comfort. They simply unplugged. No thank you. No closure, just silence. And that silence, it leaves you questioning everything. Was any of it real? Did they ever care? Was I just convenient? Here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Some relationships are built on need, not respect. On emotional consumption, not connection. And when you're no longer the source of comfort they crave, when your boundaries begin to interrupt their access, they vanish. Not because you failed them, but because you stopped feeding the dynamic that kept them emotionally dependent on you. The Stoics would remind us here, never place your peace in someone else's hands. Because the moment your worth is tied to being needed, you become disposable the moment you're no longer useful. You're not a life raft. You're not a tool. You're a person, with limits, needs, and a right to protect your own energy. So if someone left the moment you stopped rescuing them, take that not as a loss, but as a reveal. They didn't betray you. They exposed themselves. They showed you they were not here for mutual connection, but for emotional convenience. And while that may sting at first, over time it becomes freedom. Because once you realize that your worth is not measured by how much you carry for others, you stop bending, shrinking, and breaking just to keep them comfortable. You stop being the outlet, and you start becoming the source of your own strength, clarity, and peace. So the next time someone disappears when you're no longer useful, don't chase, don't explain, don't blame yourself. Just remember, you are not disposable. You are not here to fix, to save, or to serve everyone's emotional survival. You are here to grow, to rise, to connect with people who see your heart, not just your help. And those people, they don't unplug, they invest, they reciprocate. And most importantly, they stay. Part 3. The transaction disguised as friendship. Have you ever looked back at a friendship and realized it was never really about you? It looked like connection. It felt like loyalty. But underneath the surface, it was always a transaction. They weren't investing in who you are. They were investing in what you could do for them. Maybe it was the way you always listened, the way you made them feel important, the way you constantly showed up when no one else did. But the moment you stopped giving, your time, your attention, your energy, the entire friendship started to crumble. No calls, no effort, no presence, and suddenly it hits you. It was never a relationship. It was a deal. And the deal was only good, as long as you kept paying. See, there's a subtle danger in these kinds of bonds. They don't look toxic. They don't shout betrayal. They whisper dependency, guilt, and silent expectations. You think it's friendship because it feels familiar. But in truth, it's extraction dressed as connection. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "Attach yourself to what is true, not what is temporary." And here's what's true. Real friendships don't collapse when you set a boundary. They don't vanish when you can't give. They don't measure your value by your usefulness. But relationships rooted in extraction? They do. Because they were never built on truth. They were built on need. And when your well runs dry, when you stop overextending, when you stop saying yes to things that cost you peace, what's temporary starts to fade. And as painful as that is, it's a gift. Because when the transactional falls away, the true is revealed. You don't have to carry the weight of people who only show up when there's something to gain. That's not friendship. That's emotional labor without love. And it's okay to let that go. It doesn't mean you're cold. It doesn't mean you're selfish. It means you've grown wise enough to know the difference between connection and convenience. So here's the challenge. Look at the relationships in your life. Ask yourself, if I stopped giving, would they still be standing beside me? If the answer is no, you're not losing a friend. You're closing a one-sided contract that was draining your soul. And in its place, you create space. Space for people who show up not for what you offer, but for who you are. People who celebrate your presence, not your productivity. People who stay, not just when you're useful, but when you're empty and real and human. Because that's the kind of friendship worth keeping. And that's the kind of life Stoicism calls us to build, rooted in truth, not in transactions. Part 4. Your growth exposes their insecurity. There's something no one warns you about when you start healing, growing, and stepping into your power. Not everyone will celebrate you. In fact, some of the people closest to you might start pulling away. Not because you wronged them, not because you changed in a harmful way, but because your growth made them uncomfortable. Your discipline reminded them of their distractions. Your boundaries reminded them of their lack of self-respect. Your peace made their chaos feel exposed. And instead of rising with you, what do? They retreat. Quietly, passively, sometimes even with a smile. But make no mistake, it's not distance, it's discomfort. The late-night party friends may fade when you start choosing rest over recklessness. The constant complainers may ghost you when you start speaking about solutions, not problems. The drama seekers might label you cold or distant when you stop reacting and start protecting your peace. You didn't offend them. You exposed them, and that's a hard truth to accept, because deep down, many of us want our growth to inspire others. We want those we care about to come along, to elevate with us, to match the new standards we've set. But here's the Stoic reality. Not everyone is ready to face their own excuses. When you become the mirror, not everyone wants to look. Your discipline isn't a judgment, but it reflects their inconsistency. Your boundaries aren't punishment, but they expose where they've been overstepping. Your calm isn't arrogance, but it reveals how addicted they are to emotional noise. And instead of facing that truth within themselves, it's easier for them to step back, to avoid, to distance themselves from the version of you that requires them to evolve. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." In other words, choose your growth, even if it means growing alone for a while. Because the right people won't be threatened by your boundaries. They'll respect them. They won't envy your discipline. They'll be inspired by it. And they won't call your peace boring. They'll recognize it as the foundation of real strength. So if your evolution is making people walk away, let them. You were never meant to shrink just to stay in someone's comfort zone. You're not here to dim your light to keep others from feeling insecure in their shadow. You're here to become fully, freely, and unapologetically. And anyone who can't handle that was never meant to go where you're headed. Part 5. You broke their control. Let's talk about one of the most powerful turning points in your personal growth. The moment you became unmanageable. Not in a chaotic way. Not in a reckless way, but in a way that freed you from manipulation, guilt, and emotional control. Because for a long time, you might have been someone who said yes to keep the peace. Who bent over backwards just to be accepted. Who allowed others to pull the strings, just to avoid tension. And the people who benefited from that, they didn't love you. They loved the version of you they could control. The version that was afraid to say no. The version that apologized for having needs. The version that confused pleasing others with being kind. But then, something changed. You stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stopped letting guilt dictate your decisions. You stopped being predictable and started being authentic. And when that happened, some people, maybe even people you once loved, started to retreat. Why? Because control was their language. And you stopped speaking it. You became independent, emotionally neutral. No longer triggered by their silence, their disappointment, their manipulative praise or withdrawal. And for those who used guilt, obligation, or confusion as tools, you became a threat. See, when someone can no longer control you, they often try to discredit you. Suddenly you're cold, selfish, different. But what they're really saying is this: I can't manipulate you anymore, and I don't know how to handle that. The Stoics would smile here, not with arrogance, but with understanding, because they believed in mastering the only thing we truly control, ourselves. Epictetus once taught, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And when you reclaim your emotions, when you no longer beg for validation, when your decisions are driven by principle, not pressure, you break their grip. You become free. And yes, that freedom may come at a cost. You might lose people. You might confuse others. You might even feel lonely for a while. But what you gain in return is priceless. Clarity. Peace. Power. Not the power to control others, but the power to remain grounded when others try to control you. So if someone disappeared when you stopped being easy to manipulate, don't chase them. Don't explain yourself to them. Don't shrink back into the version of you that tolerated it. Because your boundaries are not the problem. Your independence is not a betrayal. Your growth is not up for negotiation. You didn't ruin the connection. You just refused to be controlled by it anymore. And that, my friend, is when the real freedom begins. Part 6. Boundaries are filters. Let's get one thing clear. Your boundaries are not walls. They're filters. They don't push away people who love you. They reveal the ones who only love their access to you. When you start saying no without guilt, when you stop explaining yourself to everyone, when you finally realize that your peace is your responsibility, watch how fast certain people disappear. And it's not because you changed. It's because your boundaries stripped away their comfort zone. Some were never truly connected to your soul. They were connected to their convenience. As long as you were available, agreeable, and emotionally wide open, they stayed. But the moment you started protecting your time, energy, and heart, they called you difficult, selfish, or too distant. But here's the truth. Real relationships don't crumble when you set a boundary. They clarify. Because genuine love doesn't require constant access. It doesn't demand you to exhaust yourself just to maintain the connection. It doesn't fall apart when you finally say, "I need space," or "That doesn't work for me." That's not rejection. That's emotional maturity. The Stoics taught us this in their own way. They believed freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about emotional sovereignty, the power to live by your values, not your need for approval. Epictetus once said, "If you want to be free, learn to live without the need for validation." And that's what your boundaries do. They protect your energy from being siphoned by people who never intended to pour anything back in. They help you see who's there for you and who's only there for what you give. So ask yourself, if you said no more often, if you stopped people-pleasing, if you chose peace over people's opinions, who would still be standing beside you? Because those who disappear weren't meant for the next version of you. They were only compatible with your unguarded, overextended, emotionally drained self. And you've outgrown that. Now you're becoming someone who values truth over tolerance, alignment over attachment, connection over control. And that version of you? That version doesn't chase. That version doesn't beg. That version lets go with grace. Because you finally understand, the people who love you will not be offended by your boundaries. They will honor them. And the ones who aren't meant to stay, they won't survive your no. And that's the point. You're not here to be constantly accessible. You're here to be authentic. Let your boundaries do the filtering. What remains afterward, that's real. Part 7. Awareness feels like betrayal to the manipulative. There comes a moment in every journey of growth when your eyes finally open. You start noticing the red flags you used to ignore. You begin to question the dynamics you once called normal. You stop making excuses for behavior that used to leave you drained, confused, or ashamed. And that clarity? It threatens people who thrived in your confusion. Because when you were uncertain, you were easier to influence. When you doubted yourself, they could twist the truth. When you didn't trust your gut, they could write the script of your life and cast themselves as the hero. But now you see it. You see how they subtly undermined your confidence, how they praised you just enough to keep you attached, but criticized you enough to keep you small. How they shifted blame, rewrote reality, and used guilt like a leash around your mind. And when you start pulling back, when you start asking questions, when you stop nodding along and start standing up for yourself, they call it betrayal. You've changed. You're too sensitive now. You're making things up. You're overthinking everything. No. You're not betraying them. You're just no longer betraying yourself. You're not being too critical. You're being awake. And that's a problem for people who relied on your blindness to keep control. See, clarity is dangerous to the manipulative because it exposes the game. It breaks the spell. It dismantles the illusion they spent so long constructing. And the moment you start seeing clearly, you become unpredictable, unmoved by guilt, detached from their approval, rooted in your own truth. That scares them, because manipulation only works in the shadows, and you've turned on the lights. The Stoics knew the power of awareness. They believed that wisdom begins not with answers, but with honest observation. As Epictetus said, it's not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. And when your opinions begin to shift, when you stop seeing through the lens of guilt and start seeing through the lens of truth, you can no longer be used in the same way. You begin to choose differently. Speak differently, walk away faster, and that's not betrayal. That's evolution. So if your awareness has caused certain people to fall away, let them. It's not your responsibility to protect someone else's comfort at the expense of your clarity. You're not too harsh. You're not too distant. You're simply no longer playing a role in someone else's manipulative script. And that, right there, is one of the strongest signs of growth. Part 8. They believed the wrong story. Have you ever lost someone? Not because of something you did, but because of something they heard. They started acting distant, cold, maybe even hostile, and you're left wondering, what happened? What did I miss? The truth. They didn't walk away because they knew your story. They walked away because someone else told it for you. They didn't come to you. They didn't ask questions. They didn't give you the benefit of the doubt. Instead, they listened to whispers, to projections, to gossip dressed up as concern. And suddenly, the version of you they carried in their mind wasn't one you even recognized. You became the villain in a story you never agreed to be part of. Not because of your actions, but because someone else needed a narrative that made them feel better about their own. And that hurts. Not just because they believed the wrong story, but because they never asked for the truth. Here's the thing. Some people don't want the truth. They want something simple. They want something easy to digest. They want a version of events that justifies their own avoidance, envy, or insecurity. And the real you, the layered, nuanced, misunderstood you, that's too complicated for people who prefer certainty over sincerity. But here's where Stoicism steps in with clarity and strength. Marcus Aurelius reminded us, if you are pained by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them. And Epictetus said, if evil is spoken of you, and it be true, correct yourself. If it be a lie, laugh at it, because the Stoic doesn't fear false opinion. The Stoic fears the loss of reason, of character, of inner clarity. Your peace does not come from everyone believing the right version of you. It comes from you knowing who you are, especially when others don't. So let them misunderstand you. Let them gossip. Let them walk away based on a version of you someone else invented. That's not your burden to carry. Your responsibility is not to convince every doubter. It's to remain rooted in integrity, even when you're being misrepresented. Because people who are meant to be in your life, truly meant to be there, will eventually see past the noise. They will feel your truth. They will sense your steadiness. And they will come to you, not with accusations, but with curiosity and care. The rest, let them go. You don't owe explanations to those who never asked for one. Let your actions speak louder than the rumors. Let your consistency be your defense. And let your reason, your clarity of mind, be the only voice you truly answer to. That is Stoic strength. And that is how you rise above the story someone else tried to write for you. Part 9. What you lost wasn't a person, it was an illusion. Sometimes, what hurts the most isn't the person who left. It's the story you told yourself about who they were. You thought it was forever. You thought it was unbreakable. You thought they saw you, valued you, stood with you. But over time, the mask slipped. Or maybe you simply grew clear enough to finally see through it. And now that they're gone, you're left sitting with the silence, wondering, did I lose something real? Here's the truth. You didn't lose a person. You lost the illusion of who you thought they were. And that illusion served its purpose for a while. It may have brought comfort. It may have filled a void. It may have matched the version of you that existed back then. But that season is over. Some relationships aren't meant to last. They're meant to teach. They reveal your blind spots. They sharpen your intuition. They push you to develop boundaries, clarity and strength you didn't know you needed. It hurts, yes, but not all pain is damage. Some pain is revelation, like the tree that sheds its leaves in the fall, not out of death, but out of wisdom. It knows that in order to grow again, it must first let go. And nature doesn't mourn fallen leaves. It understands what is lost, makes space for what is next. The same goes for you. When someone exits your life, by choice, by betrayal, or by quiet disappearance, it may feel like a loss. But it could be an act of clearing space for peace, clearing space for truth, clearing space for people who will love you for your essence, not your performance. The Stoics knew this well. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." That loss, that heartbreak, that sudden departure, it becomes your way forward towards something more honest, more aligned, more whole. So stop romanticizing what was never rooted. Stop grieving illusions. What you thought you had may have been real in your heart. But relationships are not just built in your mind. They're revealed through action, consistency, and presence. And if someone vanished when life stopped being convenient, if they disappeared when you grew into your truth, then what you lost wasn't love. It was illusion, a placeholder, a lesson wrapped in human form. And now, with that space cleared, you're free to plant something real, something that can grow, something that won't run when your truth becomes too loud to ignore. So grieve if you must, but don't stay there, because what's ahead of you requires your full presence, not your attachment to a chapter that was only meant to be part of the preface. Part 10. From reaction to observation. There comes a moment in life where your strength is no longer measured by how loudly you react, but by how calmly you observe. Someone leaves, let them. They stop calling, let them. The silence gets loud. Sit with it, don't chase it. Don't beg for closure that was never yours to hold. Because the truth is, if someone could walk away without clarity, if they could vanish instead of communicate, if they were swayed by whispers, distance, or discomfort, they were never grounded in truth to begin with. And here's where the Stoic path calls us forward, not toward reactivity, but toward peace. Peace in observation. Peace in letting go. Peace in knowing it's not your job to hold what was never secure. The old version of you might have chased after people who went silent. You might have over-explained, over-apologized, tried to fix what was never yours to fix. But now you understand. Not every silence deserves your pursuit. Some people leave not because you failed, but because you grew beyond the role they were comfortable keeping you in. And when that happens, you don't react. You observe. You observe who disappears when your boundaries arrive. You observe who falls away when you no longer overextend. You observe who fades out when your peace begins to disrupt their chaos. And you let it be. Because the Stoic doesn't hold grudges. The Stoic doesn't cling to what's already drifting. The Stoic sees change not as punishment, but as part of the design. Epictetus taught, "Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish them to happen as they do, and your life will go smoothly." In other words, when someone leaves, don't resist. Don't fight the tide. Don't try to rewind what was never meant to last. You learn, you let go, you move forward. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. Because emotional maturity means realizing that people's actions are often reflections of them, not of you. And their exit isn't always a rejection. Sometimes it's protection, a clearing, a redirection. So here's the invitation. Let what's meant to leave, leave. Let what no longer resonates fall away. Let silence teach you, not torment you. Because when you stop reacting to every shift and start observing it, you reclaim your power. You realize you don't need to hold on to those who are never steady. You don't need to fight for spaces that no longer fit. And you certainly don't need to keep trying to prove your worth to people who were never ready to receive it. The people who are aligned with your path, they don't run when things get quiet. They don't flinch when you grow. They stay, and they evolve with you. Until then, observe, learn, detach with grace. Because the real you doesn't need to be understood by everyone, only by yourself. Sometimes silence stings more than words ever could. It creeps in after connection, after loyalty, after moments that felt real. And suddenly, gone. No goodbye, no explanation. Just the echo of absence, and it hurts, because we're human. We crave clarity, closure, the chance to say, was it all real? But here's the hidden gift. The truth most people never tell you. Their silence is not just absence. It's revelation. It shows you who they really were. It ends the illusion. It clears the fog. And most of all, it frees you. You stop shrinking just to keep people close. You stop begging to be understood. You stop proving your worth to those who never valued it in the first place. And somewhere in that quiet, between the hurt and the healing, you find your voice, your clarity, your power, yourself. This is where Stoic wisdom lights the way. The Stoics never promised a life without pain. They never said people wouldn't leave, or that truth wouldn't cut deep. What they taught was this: freedom is the reward of self-mastery. Epictetus. Not freedom from loss, not freedom from silence, but freedom from needing validation to know who you are. That's the real peace. When you no longer fear being misunderstood, when you no longer chase the ones who walked away, when you look in the mirror and know you didn't lose anything true, you simply made room for what is. So if someone's silence left you questioning everything, let this be your reminder. Let the false fall away. Let the one-sided friendships dissolve. Let the emotionally transactional relationships end. Let the people who were only there for the old version of you fade out with grace. Because what remains after the silence, that's what's real. That's what's rooted. That's what was always meant to stay. You didn't just survive their silence, you outgrew it. So walk forward, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. Not with fear, but with presence. Not seeking to be accepted, but living in self-respect. Because your worth was never in their words. It was in your ability to rise, quietly, fully, and powerfully, from the silence they left behind. If this message resonated with you, if you've walked through silence, loss, or growth that cost you relationships, you're not alone. Drop a comment below and share what part of this journey hit home for you. And if you're ready to keep rising in truth, in peace, and in self-mastery, subscribe. This channel is for those who are done shrinking and ready to evolve, because sometimes the greatest freedom begins where the noise ends,